At my wife's family house party, my wife's sister cracked a joke. If your wife cheats on you with her true love, her high school lover, will you whimper? Everyone laughed except me. He's impotent in bed anyway. My wife smirked. I just raised my hot dog and said message received. I moved out that night, cut contact, and vanished. A year later my name is Jack Carter, and at 29 years old, I thought I had this whole marriage thing figured out. See, for 8 long years, I bought into this romantic that marriage was like cement. You know, mix all the right ingredients together, give it time to cure, and boom, you've got something unbreakable that'll last forever. What a load of crap that turned out to be. But hey, hindsight's 20/20, right? Clara and I had been through the ringer more times than I could count. We'd scraped through those brutal early years when we were broker than a joke. Living off instant ramen like it was some kind of gourmet cuisine. I'm talking the cheap stuff, too. None of that fancy cup noodles nonsense. We'd stretch a pack of top ramen into 2 meals if we had to, adding whatever sad vegetables we could afford from the discount bin at the grocery store. Our first apartment was a shoebox with paper-thin walls where we could hear our neighbors' entire life stories whether we wanted to or not. We slept on this mattress that was thinner than a pancake. Probably picked up from some sketchy thrift store that smelled like mothballs and broken dreams. But here's the thing that really gets me now. I thought we were a team back then. I mean, we'd have these knockdown drag-out fights that would go on until the sun came up. Voices hoarse from yelling, throwing around accusations like confetti at a divorce party. Then we'd collapse from exhaustion, make up with desperate kisses and whispered apologies, swearing we'd never let it get that bad again. Rinse and repeat because apparently we were glutton for punishment. Clara used to call me her rock. And man did I eat that up with a spoon. She'd tell people at parties how I was the steady one. The reliable guy who kept her grounded when her head floated off into the clouds with all her big dreams and wild schemes. I wore that badge like it was some kind of medal of honor. Puffing out my chest whenever she'd introduce me as Jack, my anchor. What a naive idiot I was, never realizing that being someone's rock also meant I was about as exciting as watching paint dry. And just as easy to ignore when something more interesting came along. The signs started creeping in so slowly, I almost convinced myself I was imagining things. You know how it goes. Little things that seem insignificant until you string them all together and realize you're looking at a damn tapestry of neglect. Her hand stopped brushing my shoulder when she'd walk past me in the hallway. Used to be this automatic thing, this casual touch that said, "Hey, I see you. I love you." Then one day, I realized it had been weeks since I'd felt that gentle contact. And suddenly, I'm standing there like some kind of pathetic ghost, hoping for scraps of affection. She started smiling more at her phone than at me. And isn't that just a kick in the teeth? I'd walk into a room and catch her grinning at that damn screen. Thumbs flying across the keyboard, completely absorbed in whatever digital conversation was apparently more fascinating than anything I had to say. When I'd ask who she was texting, she'd give me this dismissive wave and mutter something about work or her sister or some friend I'd never heard of. But the smile would disappear the second she looked at me, like someone had flipped a switch, and all the joy just drained right out of her face. The worst part was watching our laughter slowly transform into silence. We used to crack each other up over the stupidest stuff. Bad movies, weird neighbors, inside jokes that probably weren't even that funny, but sent us into hysterics because we were young and in love, and everything seemed hilarious when you had someone to share it with. Those moments became rarer and rarer until our conversations consisted of logistics and grocery lists. And did you remember to pay the electric bill? That silence wasn't just quiet. It was this living, breathing wall that grew thicker every day. I'd try to break through it with jokes or stories about my day, but they'd fall flat against this invisible barrier Clara had constructed around herself. She'd nod politely, make the appropriate noises, but her eyes would be somewhere else entirely. It was like talking to a beautiful mannequin that occasionally moved its mouth to say, and that's nice, honey. I started analyzing every interaction, replaying conversations in my head like some kind of forensic investigator, trying to figure out where it all went wrong. Was it something I said, something I didn't say? Was I too boring, too predictable, too much of that steady rock she used to claim she loved? The harder I tried to reconnect, the further she seemed to drift away, like I was trying to grab smoke with my bare hands. Friends would ask how married life was treating us, and I'd plaster on this fake smile and give them the standard answer. Great. Couldn't be better. Meanwhile, I was dying a slow death inside, watching the woman I'd promised to love and cherish gradually transform into a polite stranger who happened to share my bed and my Netflix password. The really twisted part, I kept believing we could fix it. I kept thinking that if I just tried harder, loved better, became more interesting somehow, I could win her back. Like she was some kind of prize I temporarily misplaced rather than a person who'd simply decided I wasn't worth the effort anymore. I was so busy being her reliable rock that I forgot rocks don't feel pain when people step all over them. Looking back now, I can see I was already becoming invisible in my own life, fading into the background like wallpaper nobody notices until it starts peeling at the edges. But at the time, I just kept mixing that cement, convinced that with enough patience and the right formula, I could build something unbreakable. What a joke that turned out to be. You know what's funny? Everyone thinks yelling and screaming means a marriage is circling the drain. Hollywood's got us all convinced that the moment couples start throwing dishes and slamming doors, it's game over. But let me tell you something I learned the hard way. Silence is 1,000 times worse than any shouting match you could imagine. At least when Clara and I used to fight, there was passion behind it. Fire. Even if we were pissed off and saying things designed to hurt, we were still engaged with each other. We still cared enough to get worked up, to let our emotions spill out all over the place like some kind of messy human train wreck. But when she stopped fighting with me altogether, that's when I should have known I was truly screwed. The transition was so gradual, I almost missed it entirely. One day, we're having these epic battles that shake the walls, and the next thing I know, Clara's responding to everything with this infuriating smirk that made me want to punch something. Not her, obviously. I'm not that kind of guy, but maybe a wall or a pillow or one of those inflatable punching bags they sell at sporting goods stores for exactly this kind of situation. It started with the little disagreements first. I'd mentioned that maybe we should try a different restaurant for date night. Something other than that overpriced Italian place where the portions are smaller than a toddler's fist and the waiters act like they're doing you a personal favor by bringing you water. Instead of her usual, "But I love their tiramisu," followed by a playful argument about food preferences, I'd get this weird half smile and a shrug that said absolutely nothing and everything at the same time. When I'd ask her opinion on bigger stuff, should we repaint the living room? What did she think about maybe getting a dog? Did she want to visit my parents for Thanksgiving? She'd give me these responses that weren't really responses at all. Whatever you think is best, Jack, I'm sure you'll figure it out. You're the responsible one. Each answer delivered with that same maddening smirk, like she was in on some joke that I wasn't clever enough to understand. The worst part was when I finally worked up the courage to ask the big question, the one that had been eating at me for months like some kind of emotional parasite. We were sitting on our couch. Well, my couch, since she'd claimed the recliner as her personal throne, and I just blurted it out during a commercial break. "Claire, are you happy? I mean, really happy with us?" She didn't even pause the TV. Didn't turn to look at me. Just kept staring at some stupid commercial for car insurance while that smirk spread across her face like she'd been waiting for this moment her entire life. Why ask questions you already know the answers to? That sentence hit me like a freight train loaded with broken dreams and expired warranties. It hollowed me out from the inside, scooped out everything that used to be confident and hopeful, and left behind this empty shell that looked like Jack Carter but felt like a cheap knockoff. Because the thing is, I didn't know the answer. I was asking because I genuinely had no clue what was going on in her head anymore. But apparently, my ignorance was so obvious that even asking the question was pointless. But did I give up? Hell no. Because I'm Jack Carter, reliable to a fault. And quitters are for people who don't understand the value of hard work and determination. So, I doubled down on trying to fix whatever was broken between us. I planned date nights like I was organizing a military operation, researching restaurants, checking movie times, even buying her flowers from that fancy place downtown that charges $20 for what you can get at the grocery store for $5. She'd brush off every gesture with excuses that got more creative as time went on. "I'm too tired tonight. I've got that early meeting tomorrow." Sabrina and I already made plans. That last one became her go-to. Actually, once her sister moved in, and suddenly everything revolved around whatever drama was currently consuming Sabrina's life, I started talking less around the house, partly because every conversation felt like walking through a minefield, and partly because Clara had made it pretty clear that my thoughts and opinions ranked somewhere below the weather forecast in terms of importance. My jokes fell flat. My observations about work or current events got met with distracted nods. And my attempts at deeper conversations were deflected with the skill of a professional volleyball player. The silence that filled our house wasn't peaceful. It was thick and oppressive, like trying to breathe through wet concrete. I catch myself holding my breath sometimes just to see if anyone would notice. But Clara was always absorbed in her phone or her laptop or some conversation with Sabrina that apparently required whispering and giggling like they were plotting to overthrow a small government that I became a ghost in my own home, floating from room to room without making much impact on anything. In the mornings, I'd make coffee for both of us out of habit, but she'd already be gone or rushing out the door with a travel mug she'd filled herself. In the evenings, I'd ask about her day and get monosyllabic responses delivered without eye contact. Fine, busy, tired. To everyone else, I was still reliable Jack, the guy who showed up on time, paid his bills, remembered birthdays, and could be counted on to help you move furniture or fix your computer. But inside, I felt like I was disappearing one piece at a time. Like someone was slowly erasing me with one of those big pink erasers we used to use in elementary school. The crazy part was that I kept thinking it was temporary. Like maybe Clara was going through some kind of phase, dealing with stress at work or hormonal changes, or just needing some space to figure things out. I made excuses for her behavior the way you'd make excuses for a friend who keeps canceling plans. Maybe next time will be different. Maybe she'll remember why she used to enjoy my company. But deep down in that part of your brain that knows the truth, even when the rest of you is still clinging to hope, like a life preserver on a sinking ship, I was starting to understand that this wasn't a rough patch we were going through. This was who we'd become. This was our new normal. And it sucked worse than anything I could have imagined. The silence had won, and I didn't even know we were fighting a war. Just when I thought things couldn't get any more awkward in my own damn house, the universe decided to throw me a curveball that would make a major league pitcher jealous. Enter Sabrina, Clara's younger sister. Stage left with enough drama to power a small theater district. Sabrina was 26, fresh out of what she dramatically called the worst breakup in human history. Though, from what I could piece together, it sounded more like her boyfriend got tired of funding her lifestyle and decided to cut his losses. She showed up at our door on a Tuesday evening with 3 oversized suitcases, a house plant that looked half dead, and enough emotional baggage to sink a cruise ship. "I just need somewhere to crash for a few weeks," she announced, breezing past me like I was the doorman instead of the guy whose name was actually on the lease. "Just until I get back on my feet." Famous last words right there. Now, don't get me wrong, I wasn't completely heartless about the situation. Family is family and everyone goes through rough patches. Hell, Clara and I had been through our share of disasters, so I understood the need for a safety net. What I didn't understand was how quickly my own house would stop feeling like mine. Within the first week, Sabrina had somehow managed to colonize every inch of our modest 2-bedroom place. My home office, the tiny spare room where I actually worked to pay for the roof over all our heads, became her personal yoga studio. I'd come home from a long day of staring at code, looking forward to unwinding in my own space, only to find her contorted into some impossible position on a mat that took up the entire floor. "Oh, hey, Jack." She'd chirp upside down and downward dog or whatever the hell that pose was called. "Just finishing up my evening flow. The energy in this room is absolutely perfect for my practice." Perfect for her practice, maybe. Terrible for my sanity. My desk got buried under her collection of essential oils, crystals, and self-help books with titles like Manifesting Your Best Life and Healing Your Inner Goddess. My filing cabinet became her dresser overflow. My comfortable office chair, the one I'd saved up for months to buy, was now draped with her sports bras and leggings that apparently needed to air dry in what used to be my sanctuary. But the office takeover was just the beginning. Sabrina's presence spread through our apartment like some kind of invasive species. The bathroom became a war zone of beauty products that I couldn't even pronounce. Where Clara and I used to have maybe 6 bottles total, shampoo, conditioner, body wash, and the basics. Suddenly, every surface was covered with serums, masks, exfoliants, and mysterious potions that promised to do everything from detoxifying your pores to realigning your chakras. I go to brush my teeth and have to move 17 different bottles just to reach the toothpaste. My razor got buried behind some kind of jade roller that Sabrina swore was essential for lymphatic drainage, whatever the hell that meant. The shower looked like a Sephora had exploded in it. And don't even get me started on the laundry situation. Suddenly, every load became an archaeological expedition. Sabrina's clothes were everywhere, draped over chairs, hanging from doorwork knobs, spread across our couch like some kind of fabric installation art. She had this habit of doing laundry, and then just leaving it. What clothes would sit in the washer for days until they started to smell, then she'd rewash them and repeat the whole cycle. "I'm just so busy with my healing journey," she'd explain when Clara would gently suggest maybe putting clothes away. "I can't be bothered with mundane tasks when I'm working on my spiritual growth, right?" Spiritual growth. That must be what they're calling unemployment these days. But here's where things got really twisted. Clara absolutely lit up around her sister. It was like someone had flipped a switch that I didn't even know existed. The woman who could barely muster enthusiasm for a conversation with her own husband suddenly became this animated, laughing, energetic person. Whenever Sabrina was around, they'd spend hours talking about everything and nothing. Sabrina's ex-boyfriend, who was apparently a narcissistic energy vampire. Their childhood memories, celebrity gossip, astrology, you name it. Clara would hang on every word like Sabrina was dispensing ancient wisdom instead of recycled pop psychology she'd picked up from Instagram influencers. The inside jokes started almost immediately. They'd reference things that happened before I came into the picture, or they developed new running gags that somehow always seemed to exclude me. They had this weird sisterly shorthand where one of them would start a sentence and the other would finish it, then they'd dissolve into giggles like they were still teenagers sharing secrets at a sleepover. Remember when we convinced Mom that Clara would start, that aliens had rearranged her garden gnomes? Sabrina would finish and they'd both crack up like it was the funniest thing in human history that I'd sit there on my own couch in my own living room feeling like I was watching a show I wasn't invited to be part of. Every shared glance, every burst of laughter, every inside reference drove home the same message. You're not part of this club, Jack. The morning routine became particularly brutal. I'd stumble into the kitchen looking for coffee. That sacred ritual that made me functional enough to face another day, only to find Sabrina already there, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, chatting Clara's ear off about her dreams or her chakras, or whatever mystical nonsense was on her mind that day. Clara would be making elaborate coffee drinks for both of them. Fancy stuff with whipped cream, flavored syrups, cinnamon sprinkles, the whole 9 yards. These weren't just cups of coffee. They were Instagram-worthy works of art that probably took 20 minutes to construct. Meanwhile, my coffee maker, the simple, reliable machine that had served me faithfully for years, would be pushed to the back of the counter, unplugged and forgotten. My usual morning coffee would sit there getting cold while Clara fussed over Sabrina's complex beverage requirements. "Good morning, Jack." Sabrina would sing out like she was the hostess of this household instead of the unexpected guest who'd been temporarily crashing here for what was now going on 2 months' morning. I'd mumble, reaching for my neglected coffee and trying not to let the bitterness show. And I'm not just talking about the coffee. The living room became their domain, too. Sabrina's friends started showing up for impromptu wine nights that nobody bothered to run by me first. I'd come home expecting a quiet evening, maybe catch up on some shows with Clara, only to find our living room had been transformed into some kind of support group. Meeting. 5 or 6 women would be scattered across our furniture, glasses of wine in hand, discussing their journeys and growth in toxic relationships, while our coffee table disappeared under a spread of cheese, crackers, and whatever expensive wine they decided was necessary for their healing circle. "Oh, Jack's home," Clara would announce like I was some kind of interesting visitor instead of the guy who lived there. "Ladies, you remember my husband, Jack?" They'd all turn and give me these polite smiles that somehow managed to be welcoming and dismissive at the same time, like I was a friendly dog who'd wandered into their important conversation. "Hi, Jack." They'd chorus, then immediately turn back to whatever earth-shattering discussion I'd interrupted that I realized standing there in my own living room with my cheap work clothes and my tired face that I had officially dropped a rung on the ladder in my own marriage. Hell, I dropped several rungs. Sabrina got the fancy coffee, the attention, the laughter, the late-night conversations. I got the leftovers of Clara's energy if there were any leftovers at all. And the worst part, I could feel myself slipping further down that ladder every single day. And I had no idea how to climb back up. The breaking point came at Clara's family house party. And let me tell you, when the universe decides to kick you in the teeth, it doesn't mess around with subtlety. This wasn't going to be some quiet moment of realization. Oh no. This was going to be a full-blown public execution disguised as a backyard barbecue. Every year, the Doyle family threw this massive get-together at Clara's parents' house. Picture your typical American suburban nightmare. A sprawling backyard with a deck that had seen better days, picnic tables covered in checkered tablecloths, and enough folding chairs to seat a small army. Mrs. Doyle would spend weeks preparing like she was hosting the freaking United Nations, making sure there was enough potato salad and coleslaw to feed half the county. This particular Saturday was one of those perfect late summer days that make you forget how much you hate everything. The sun was shining. There was a gentle breeze that kept things from getting too sticky. And the smell of charcoal and lighter fluid hung in the air like some kind of suburban incense. Under normal circumstances, I might have actually enjoyed myself. But these weren't normal circumstances, were they? The whole extended Doyle clan was there. And when I say extended, I mean extended. We're talking about Mr. and Mrs. Doyle, of course, along with Clara's aunts and uncles, cousins I'd met maybe twice in 8 years, old family friends who'd known Clara since she was in diapers, and neighbors who'd somehow earned permanent invitation status through years of borrowing lawnmowers and returning casserole dishes. I should have seen the warning signs from the moment we walked through the back gate. Clara immediately gravitated towards Sabrina, who was already holding court near the drink table, regaling a small crowd with what I assumed was another thrilling installment of her post-breakup spiritual awakening saga. They fell into their usual sister act, finishing each other's sentences, sharing meaningful looks, laughing at jokes that apparently required a secret decoder ring to understand on me. I did what I always did at these things. I grabbed a beer from the cooler, loaded up a paper plate with whatever Mrs. Doyle had deemed acceptable barbecue food, and found a quiet spot where I could blend into the background like suburban camouflage. That's where I was when it happened. Sitting on a folding chair that was definitely not designed for long-term comfort, working my way through a hot dog that had seen better days. When Sabrina decided to provide the evening's entertainment at my expense, she was already half in the bag, which wasn't exactly shocking considering she'd probably started drinking around noon. Sabrina had this way of getting progressively louder and more dramatic as the alcohol kicked in, like someone was slowly turning up the volume on a really obnoxious radio station. The conversation had been flowing around me. Something about someone's new job, someone else's vacation plans, the usual family party small talk that you participate in just enough to be polite. I was actually starting to relax, thinking maybe I could get through this whole thing without any major incidents. That's when Sabrina's voice cut through the background chatter like a rusty knife. "Hey, Jack," she called out loud enough for half the neighborhood to hear. The entire backyard seemed to pause like someone had hit the mute button on a TV remote. "If Clara cheats on you with her true love, her high school boyfriend, will you whimper?" The silence that followed was deafening. I'm talking about the kind of quiet that makes you suddenly aware of every sound. The hiss of the grill, someone's beer bottle clinking against the table, a dog barking 3 houses over. Every single person in that backyard was staring at me, waiting to see how I'd react to being publicly humiliated by my sister-in-law. But Sabrina wasn't done. Oh no, she was just getting warmed up. I looked at Clara hoping, praying for some sign that she was going to shut this down, that she was going to stand up for her husband of 8 years and tell her sister to knock it off. Instead, what I got was something so much worse that Clara's face lit up with this twisted kind of glee, like Sabrina had just handed her the perfect opportunity she'd been waiting for. She looked directly at me and with that same smirk I'd been seeing for months, she delivered the killing blow. "He's impotent in bed anyway." The backyard erupted. I'm not talking about polite chuckles or awkward laughs. This was full-blown hysteria. Uncle Bob nearly choked on his beer. Cousin Sarah was doubled over, wiping tears from her eyes. Mrs. Doyle was covering her mouth with her hand, but I could see her shoulders shaking with suppressed laughter. Even Mr. Doyle, who usually tried to stay above the family drama, was grinning like he'd just heard the joke of the century. They were all laughing at me. Every single person in that yard, people I'd known for years, people I'd helped move furniture and fix computers and remember birthdays for, they were all having the time of their lives watching me get destroyed. That I sat there frozen, my face burning like someone had set it on fire. The hot dog in my hand suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. My beer had gone warm and tasteless. Everything around me seemed to be happening in slow motion. The laughter getting louder and more vicious, faces twisted with amusement at my expense. Clara looking absolutely delighted with herself. For a moment, I felt like I was drowning, like I was underwater. And all that laughter was just noise from the surface, distorted and cruel. Part of me wanted to shrink into that folding chair until I disappeared completely. Part of me wanted to run for the gate and never look back. Part of me wanted to scream at all of them to tell them exactly what I thought of their twisted idea of entertainment. But then something shifted inside me. Something went perfectly crystallinely still. I looked at Clara, really looked at her. I saw the satisfaction in her eyes. The way she was savoring this moment like fine wine. I saw how proud she was of her little performance. How much she was enjoying watching me squirm. And in that moment, I understood something fundamental about our relationship that I'd been too blind or too stubborn to see before. This wasn't a woman who loved me, but was going through a rough patch. This wasn't someone who was temporarily lost and would find her way back to us. This was someone who had actively chosen to humiliate me in front of her entire family, who had weaponized our private life for public entertainment, who thought my pain was hilarious. I raised my hot dog slightly like I was making a toast. My voice came out calm and steady, cutting through the laughter like a blade through silk. Message received. Those 2 words hit the backyard like a bomb. The laughter died instantly, cut off so abruptly it was almost violent. Suddenly, everyone was looking uncomfortable, shifting in their chairs, finding fascinating things to stare at in their drinks. The only sound was the grill hissing and popping in the background. I stood up slowly, placed my warm beer down on the nearest table with deliberate care, and walked toward the side gate. I didn't run, didn't storm off in a dramatic huff. I just walked steady and purposeful like a man who had finally figured out exactly where he stood. That I didn't look back. Not once, but I could feel every eye in that yard watching me leave. And I could practically hear their collective realization that the joke had suddenly stopped being funny. Behind me. The silence stretched on, heavy and awkward, like a funeral where nobody knew quite what to say. Perfect. That night, I didn't sleep. Hell, I didn't even try. Sleep was for people who had something to wake up for. And I'd just discovered that everything I thought I was waking up for had been a lie wrapped in 8 years of self-deception. That I sat in my car in the driveway for what felt like hours, engine off, just staring at the house that was supposed to be my home. Through the living room window, I could see Clara and Sabrina on the couch, probably dissecting the evening's events like a couple of vultures picking over roadkill. Every so often, one of them would laugh, and I'd wonder if they were still getting mileage out of their public execution of my dignity. Around midnight, I finally went inside. They'd moved their little post-mortem party to Clara's bedroom. I could hear their voices through the door, punctuated by occasional bursts of laughter that felt like nails on a chalkboard. I stood there in the hallway for a moment listening to my wife and her sister bond over my humiliation. And something inside me just broke. Not in a dramatic explosive way, but more like a dry branch that's been under pressure too long. One final stress and snap. Clean break. No going back. That I made my way to the bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror. The guy looking back at me was a stranger. Red-rimmed eyes, shoulders slumped like he was carrying the weight of the world. The kind of defeated expression you see on people waiting in unemployment lines. When had I become this pathetic? When had I turned into the kind of man who would sit there and take that kind of abuse in front of an audience? But here's the thing about rock bottom. It gives you perfect clarity about exactly how far you've fallen. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it also shows you the way back up. I spent the next few hours in a weird kind of focused trance, like I was operating on autopilot while my conscious mind watched from somewhere outside my body. I moved through our apartment systematically, gathering everything that mattered, everything that was actually mine rather than ours. 2 duffel bags was all it took. 8 years of marriage and my entire independent existence fit into 2 pieces of luggage. Clothes obviously enough for a couple weeks. Nothing fancy. My laptop and all the work files I'd need to keep the freelance gigs going. Important documents, birth certificate, social security card, passport, insurance papers, all the bureaucratic proof that Jack Carter existed as something more than just Clara's disappointing husband. The emergency cash was hidden in a shoe box in the back of our bedroom closet. $3,000 in 20s and 50s that I'd been squirreling away for years. Originally intended for a surprise vacation or maybe a down payment on a better place. Clara knew about the savings account, but she'd never known about this little stash. Good thing, too, because it was about to become my lifeline. I moved quietly, careful not to wake the dynamic duo, who were probably still in there planning my next public humiliation. Every item I packed felt like a small declaration of independence. My favorite coffee mug, the one Clara always rolled her eyes at because it had a stupid joke about programmers on it. My collection of paperback sci-fi novels that she'd always called boy books. The camping gear I'd bought years ago when I still had fantasies about weekend adventures that never materialized. At 3 a.m. I sat down at the kitchen table with a piece of paper and a pen. The note I left was short and sweet. Hope the joke was worth it. That was it. No long explanation, no emotional goodbye, no list of grievances or demands for better treatment. Just 7 words that said everything that needed to be said. I placed it in the exact center of the table where Clara would be sure to see it when she came out for her morning coffee. Then I did something I'd been planning for weeks, but never had the guts to follow through on. I pulled out the envelope I'd been carrying around like a talisman, the one that contained divorce papers. I'd quietly prepared during my lunch breaks. I told myself I was just being practical, just covering my bases in case things got worse. Turns out things could always get worse than you imagined. I placed the envelope right next to the note. Let her explain that to Sabrina over their fancy coffee with whipped cream and sprinkles. By 4 a.m. I was loading my bags into my car. The neighborhood was dead quiet. The kind of pre-dawn stillness where every sound seems amplified. My car door closing sounded like a gunshot in the silence. I half expected lights to start coming on, neighbors peering out their windows to see what was happening, but the world stayed dark and peaceful. That I drove out of that subdivision like I was escaping from prison, which wasn't far from the truth. Every mile between me and that house felt like shedding another layer of the pathetic person I'd become. The radio was playing some melancholy late-night song about lost love and second chances, but I turned it off. I didn't need a soundtrack for this moment. The silence was perfect. I'd done my homework during all those sleepless nights when Clara was busy ignoring me. I'd researched remote locations, places where a guy could disappear without anyone asking uncomfortable questions. The mountains had always called to me anyway back when I was young enough to think adventure was something that happened to people like me. The cabin I'd found was perfect in its simplicity. I'd contacted the owner, an old-timer named Franklin, through a series of emails where I'd been deliberately vague about my circumstances. All he cared about was that I could pay in cash and that I wasn't planning to burn the place down or turn it into a meth lab. Privacy guaranteed, no questions asked, he promised. And something in his voice told me he understood exactly what kind of privacy I was looking for. The drive took 4 hours through increasingly winding mountain roads. As the sun started to come up, I found myself climbing through forests that seemed to stretch on forever, past lakes that looked like mirrors reflecting the sky, through small towns that probably hadn't changed much since the 1950s that I stopped for gas and coffee at a little station that looked like it had been transported from another era. The guy behind the counter nodded at me like we were old friends, asked if I was heading up to do some fishing, and didn't seem to think there was anything strange about a guy in business casual clothes buying supplies at dawn on a Sunday morning. "Good fishing weather," he said, handing me my change. "That's what I'm hoping for," I replied, and realized it was the first honest thing I'd said to another person in months. It'd be why the time I reached Franklin's cabin, the sun was fully up and painting everything in shades of golden green that made the whole world look like a postcard. The cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by pine trees so tall they seemed to touch the clouds, with a little stream running behind it that sounded like nature's own white noise machine. Franklin was waiting for me on the porch, coffee cup in hand, looking exactly like Central Casting would order if they needed someone to play wise mountain man. Gray beard, flannel shirt, boots that had seen some serious miles. "You, Jack?" he asked. "That's me." "Good." Keys are on the kitchen table, propane's full, firewood stacked on the side. "Nearest neighbor's about 5 miles that way," he pointed toward a gap in the trees. "And they mind their own business, same as I do." He finished his coffee, set the cup down on the porch railing, and headed for an old pickup truck that looked like it had been through a few wars. "Anything else you need to know?" he asked. "I think I've got it figured out," he nodded approvingly. "Most folks who come up here do, and just like that, I was alone. Completely, utterly alone for the first time in years. I stood on that porch breathing air that actually smelled clean. Listening to nothing but wind in the trees and water running over rocks, and felt something I hadn't experienced in so long I'd almost forgotten what it was called. Peace. Life at the cabin became something I'd never experienced before. Beautifully, gloriously simple. No schedules dictated by someone else's moods. No walking on eggshells wondering if I'd accidentally said something that would earn me another dose of silent treatment. No competing for attention in my own damn home. Just me, the mountains, and the kind of quiet that actually lets you hear yourself think. The first week was rough, I'll admit. Not because I missed Clara. Hell no, but because I'd forgotten how to exist without constantly monitoring someone else's emotional temperature. I kept catching myself listening for footsteps in the hallway, bracing for the sound of a door slamming somewhere in the house. It took my nervous system about a week to figure out that the only drama happening here was whether I wanted coffee or tea with breakfast. My days develop their own rhythm. The kind of natural flow that happens when you're not constantly adapting to someone else's chaos. I'd wake up when my body felt like waking up. Usually around sunrise, which up here meant being greeted by light filtering through pine trees like nature's own cathedral. No alarm clock, no scrambling to get ready while someone hogged the bathroom. No starting my day already stressed about what mood I'd be walking into. Coffee became a ritual instead of a necessity. I'd make a pot using water from the well behind the cabin. Water that actually tasted like water instead of the chlorinated stuff we got in the suburbs, and sit on the front porch watching the mist rise off the little stream that ran behind the property. Sometimes deer would wander through the clearing and we'd eye each other with mutual respect. They minded their business. I minded mine. The freelance programming work was easier than I'd expected. Turns out when you're not constantly interrupted by passive-aggressive comments and household drama, you can actually focus on code for hours at a time. I'd set up my laptop on the kitchen table by the window and lose myself in the logical, predictable world of algorithms and databases. Problems had clear solutions here. If something was broken, you fixed it. If code didn't work, you debugged it until it did. No hidden meanings, no emotional landmines, no wondering if your attempts to help were actually making things worse. The money situation worked out better than I'd hoped without Clara's expensive coffee habits. Sabrina's endless stream of Amazon packages and the general financial bleeding that came from supporting 2 adults who treated money like it was infinite. My modest freelance income actually stretched pretty far. The cabin rent was cheap, groceries were basic, and my entertainment budget consisted mainly of library books and hiking boots. Speaking of hiking, Jesus, I'd forgotten what it felt like to actually use my body for something besides sitting in front of a computer and absorbing emotional punishment. The mountains around here were laced with trails that ranged from easy walks to serious climbs that left me gasping but satisfied in ways I hadn't felt in years. That I started small, following the marked trail that wound along the stream for a couple miles before looping back. But as my legs got stronger and my lungs adapted to the altitude, I got more ambitious. There were peaks up here that offered views that made you understand why people write poetry about nature. Standing on a rocky outcrop at 8,000 feet, looking out over valleys that stretch to the horizon, you start to get some perspective on how small your problems really are. The physical work was a revelation. Franklin had left behind a decent pile of seasoned firewood, but I could see I'd need more to get through the winter if I planned to stay that long. So, I learned to split wood, which turned out to be incredibly therapeutic. There's something primal and satisfying about swinging an axe, feeling it bite into the wood, watching a log split clean down the middle. Each swing was like chopping away another piece of the passive, beaten down version of myself I'd become at him. My hands got tough and calloused from the axe handle and from stacking wood. My shoulders broadened from hauling logs and water buckets. I dropped weight without trying, partly from all the physical activity, partly because I was actually eating real food instead of stress eating my way through whatever Clara had deemed acceptable for our kitchen. Hank, who ran the little general store about 10 miles down the mountain, became my main connection to the outside world. He was the kind of guy who'd probably seen every type of person who came up to these mountains looking for something or running from something. He never asked questions beyond you finding everything you need and how's that cabin treating you? I'd drive down once a week for supplies and we'd have these comfortable conversations about practical things, weather patterns, which trails were in good shape, whether the old logging road was passable after the recent rain. Hank had opinions about everything but kept them to himself unless asked directly. He'd nod approvingly when I started buying actual food instead of just canned goods and instant meals. Man's got to eat real food if he's going to do real work, he'd say, ringing up my purchase of fresh vegetables and decent meat. The evenings were when the real healing happened. I'd built up a routine of cooking an actual dinner. Nothing fancy, but real food prepared with attention instead of just fuel to get through another day. I'd eat by lantern light because there's something about electric lights that feels too harsh when you're trying to decompress from civilization. After dinner, I'd read by the fire. Franklin had left behind a collection of books that ran the gamut from classic literature to survival guides to philosophy. I worked my way through authors I'd always meant to read, but never had time for when my evenings were consumed by navigating Clara's moods and Sabrina's drama. There's a particular kind of silence you get in the mountains at night. It's not the absence of sound. There are owls calling, wind moving through the trees, the stream babbling in the background, but it's the absence of human noise, human conflict, you realize how much energy you've been spending just processing other people's chaos that I'd sit there by the fire, book in my lap, and actually think about things, not worry about them or stress about them, just think. I thought about who I'd been before I met Clara back when I had opinions and preferences and plans that weren't filtered through someone else's approval. I thought about what I wanted from life beyond just surviving each day without getting emotionally beaten down. For the first time in years, I remembered what it felt like to be content. Not ecstatically happy, not in love, not chasing some dramatic high, just quietly satisfied with where I was and what I was doing. I wasn't Jack the disappointing husband, or Jack, the convenient target for someone else's frustrations. I was just Jack, a guy who split wood and wrote code and hiked trails and read books and went to bed when he was tired instead of when someone else decided the evening was over. The best part was the complete absence of performance anxiety. I didn't have to be charming or entertaining or useful to anyone. I didn't have to monitor my words for potential offense or gauge someone else's mood before speaking. I could just exist without commentary or criticism or passive-aggressive suggestions for improvement point. One evening about 2 months in, I was sitting on the porch after a particularly good day. I'd finished a coding project that paid well. Hiked to a new lake I'd been meaning to explore and made a dinner that actually tasted like something a competent adult would prepare. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting everything in shades of orange and purple that no camera could capture that I realized I was smiling. Not the forced performative smile I'd gotten used to wearing around Clara, but an actual genuine expression of contentment. I couldn't remember the last time that it happened. That's when I knew I wasn't just hiding out up here. I was actually building something. A life that was mine, shaped by my choices, lived at my pace. For the first time in years, I was exactly where I wanted to be. 3 months into my mountain exile, curiosity finally got the better of me. I'd been living in this blissful bubble of digital silence. But let's be honest, even the most dedicated hermit eventually wonders what kind of storm they left behind. It was like having a scab you know you shouldn't pick at. But the temptation becomes irresistible. The drive down to town felt longer than usual, probably because I was dreading what I might find. I'd gotten comfortable with my new reality where the only emails I received were work-related and the only drama in my life involved whether to take the North Trail or the South Trail for my afternoon hike. But reality has this annoying habit of tracking you down, even when you're doing your best to avoid it. The public library in town was one of those small town institutions that looked like it hadn't been updated since the Carter administration. And I'm talking about Jimmy Carter, not me. Fluorescent lights that hummed like angry bees, computers that took about 5 minutes to boot up, and that particular smell of old books mixed with industrial strength cleaning products that all libraries seem to have. That I found an empty terminal in the back corner as far from the librarian's desk as possible. Not that I was doing anything illegal, but something about logging into my old email felt vaguely illicit, like I was sneaking back into a house I'd already moved out of. My inbox was a digital crime scene. 67 unread messages, most of them from Clara, with subject lines that told the whole story of her emotional journey over the past 3 months. It was like reading the stages of grief played out in Gmail notifications. The first batch sent within hours of my disappearance were pure rage. Where the hell are you? This is ridiculous, Jack. You can't just run away like a child. Call me now. I could practically hear her voice through the screen. That particular tone she used when she was pissed off, but trying to maintain some semblance of moral high ground. The messages themselves were masterpieces of deflection and blame shifting. According to Clara's version of events, I was being overly sensitive and dramatic. The party incident was just a joke that I'd blown completely out of proportion because I couldn't take a little teasing. Everyone thinks you're being ridiculous, she wrote in one particularly charming message. Sabrina feels terrible about the whole thing, but you're making it into this huge deal when it was just family having fun. Right. Family having fun. Because nothing says fun like publicly humiliating your spouse in front of 30 people. As the days passed and I didn't respond, the tone shifted from anger to manipulation. Clara had always been a master at this particular art form. The subtle guilt trip disguised as concern. I'm worried about you, Jack. This isn't like you. Whatever's going on, we can work through it together. I miss my husband. Please come home so we can talk. These messages were particularly nauseating because they were written like she was the victim in the situation. Like I was the one who'd done something wrong by refusing to stick around and be her emotional punching bag. She'd managed to completely rewrite history in her own mind, transforming herself from the aggressor into the abandoned wife whose husband had inexplicably vanished without cause. But it was the third phase that really showed me who Clara had become, or maybe who she'd always been. And I'd just been too blind to see it. When emotional manipulation didn't work, she moved on to practical concerns. I can't pay the mortgage alone. The insurance company needs both our signatures. Your student loan payment bounced. Please at least call me. I need your help with the finances. There it was laid out in black and white. After 3 months of radio silence, after all the anger and guilt trips and fake concern, what Clara really missed about me wasn't my companionship or my love or even my presence. What she missed was my wallet and my organizational skills. That I kept scrolling through the messages, watching her desperation increase with each passing week. The grammar got sloppier, the tone more frantic. She'd clearly figured out that I wasn't just taking a weekend to cool off. I was actually gone and I wasn't coming back to clean up her messes. Mixed in with Clara's increasingly unhinged messages were a few emails from Maya, our mutual friend, who'd somehow managed to stay neutral during our relationship's slow-motion car crash. Mia's messages were refreshingly honest and gave me the outside perspective I needed on what was happening back in civilization. According to Maya, my disappearance had created a domino effect that was still toppling pieces 3 months later. Turns out I'd been the invisible glue holding together more than just my marriage. I'd been managing Clara's father's construction accounts, keeping track of the Byzantine mess of invoices and payments that kept his small business afloat. I'd been running the books for Clara's mother's online boutique, handling everything from inventory tracking to tax preparation. Hell, I'd even been auto-paying Clara's student loans because she could never remember when they were due. Without me quietly handling all the behind-the-scenes financial stuff, their whole family's economic ecosystem had started collapsing like a house of cards in a hurricane. Mr. Doyle's construction business lost 3 major contracts because nobody could find the paperwork for ongoing jobs. Invoices went out late, payments got missed, and clients started looking for more reliable contractors. The man who'd laughed the loudest at my public humiliation was now scrambling to save a business he'd built over 20 years. Dumb Mrs. Doyle's boutique was even worse. Without my inventory management system, she'd been ordering duplicate items while running out of bestsellers. Her bookkeeping was such a disaster that she'd missed several tax deadlines and was now dealing with penalties and interest charges that were eating into what little profit she had left. Maya mentioned that Mrs. Doyle had actually asked Clara if there was any way to get Jack to help with the books, just temporarily. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The same people who'd found my humiliation so entertaining were now discovering exactly how much work I'd been doing behind the scenes. Work they'd taken for granted because I'd never made a big deal about it. But the real kicker was Clara herself. According to Maya, my dear wife was drowning in debt and bureaucracy. The mortgage payments were behind, the utilities had been shut off twice, and she'd maxed out both credit cards, trying to keep everything afloat. She'd tried to take over the financial management herself, but quickly discovered that staying organized requires more than just good intentions. She keeps asking me if I've heard from you, Maya wrote. I think she's finally starting to understand how much you were doing that she never noticed. She's definitely not the same person who was making jokes at that party. I leaned back in the uncomfortable library chair and stared at the screen. Part of me, a very small, petty part, felt a certain satisfaction at learning that my absence had consequences. For years, I'd felt invisible and unappreciated, like I could disappear tomorrow and nobody would notice. Turns out, I was half right. They hadn't noticed my contributions until they were gone. But boy, they were noticing now. The bigger part of me, though, just felt tired. Tired of being angry. Tired of carrying around resentment like a heavy backpack. Tired of defining myself by what other people had done to me. I'd spent 3 months building a new life. And dwelling on the wreckage of the old one felt like a step backward that I closed the browser without responding to any of the messages. Whatever was happening back in the suburbs wasn't my problem anymore. I'd filed the divorce papers. I'd left the note. I'd made my position clear. If Clara wanted to reach me, she had my lawyer's contact information. The drive back up the mountain felt like returning to sanity after visiting a psychiatric ward. With each mile of elevation, the weight of other people's drama lifted off my shoulders. By the time I reached the cabin, I'd already started forgetting the details of Clara's messages. I had firewood to split and code to write and trails to explore. The past could take care of itself. A year later, I was splitting firewood behind the cabin when I heard a car engine struggling up the gravel road. The sound was wrong. Too much grinding, not enough power, like someone was pushing an old sedan way beyond its comfort zone on mountain terrain. I paused mid-swing, axe suspended above my head, listening to the engine cough and whee its way closer. Nobody came up here by accident. The road to Franklin's cabin wasn't on any GPS system, and you had to make several deliberate turns off increasingly sketchy back roads to find it. Whoever was driving up here knew exactly where they were going, which meant they were looking for me specifically. My first thought was that maybe it was Franklin coming to check on his property or collect rent. But Franklin drove a pickup truck that sounded like it could climb mountains in its sleep. Not whatever piece of automotive desperation was currently struggling up my driveway. The car that finally emerged from the tree-in was a beat-up Honda Civic that looked like it had seen better decades. The paint had faded to that particular shade of gray that used to be some other color, and I could hear something rattling in the engine that definitely wasn't supposed to be rattling. It pulled up next to my truck and sat there for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled down. Then the driver's door opened and Clara stepped out that I almost didn't recognize her. This wasn't the put-together woman who used to spend an hour getting ready for a trip to the grocery store. This version of Clara looked like she'd been through a blender set on rough year. Her hair was longer and less styled, pulled back in a simple ponytail that suggested function over fashion. She was wearing jeans that actually looked worn from use rather than purchased pre-distressed and a jacket that had clearly seen some serious mileage. But it was her face that really told the story. The smugness was gone, replaced by something I'd never seen there before. Genuine humility mixed with exhaustion. She looked like someone who'd been carrying a heavy load for a long time and was finally ready to set it down. It was starting to rain. One of those mountain storms that comes out of nowhere and immediately soaks everything in sight. Clara stood next to her car for a moment, getting drenched like she wasn't sure she had the right to approach my porch without permission. "Jack," she said, and her voice was different, too. Smaller, less certain. None of the edge I'd gotten used to over the last years of our marriage. I stuck the axe in the chopping block and walked over to the porch, not exactly inviting her up, but not telling her to leave either. She followed, water dripping from her hair, clutching a manila envelope that was getting soaked in the downpour. "I brought the signed divorce papers," she said, holding up the envelope like a peace offering. "Everything's finalized. I'm not here to beg you to come back." That caught me off guard. I've been preparing for some kind of emotional manipulation. Maybe another attempt to guilt me into fixing her financial disasters. But this Clara seemed different, deflated in a way that suggested she'd already accepted defeat. "Then why are you here?" I asked, settling into one of the wooden chairs Franklin had left on the porch. After a moment's hesitation, Clara took the other chair, still clutching the wet envelope. "I'm here to say I'm sorry," she said, and the words came out like they'd been stuck in her throat for months. "I destroyed the best thing in my life. And I need you to know that I know that." I didn't say anything, just waited. In my experience, when someone finally decides to tell the truth, the best thing you can do is let them get it all out without interruption. I've been in therapy, she continued, staring out at the rain instead of looking at me. For about 6 months now, Dr. Martinez, she's helped me understand some things about myself that I didn't want to face. She was quiet for a long moment, gathering her thoughts or maybe her courage. I let Sabrina poison me against you, she said finally. That's not an excuse, just an explanation. She was jealous of what we had, of how stable you were, how reliable. She couldn't stand that I had something she didn't, so she started picking at it, making little comments about how boring you were, how you never did anything exciting. Clara wiped rain from her face, though it was hard to tell if it was just rain. I should have shut her down. I should have defended you. Instead, I started seeing you through her eyes. Started focusing on everything you weren't instead of everything you were. And the more I pulled away, the more you tried to fix things, which just made me more irritated because I thought you were being needy. She let out a bitter laugh that had no humor in it. God, Jack, you were trying to save our marriage, and I was annoyed that you cared enough to try. What kind of person does that make me? I could have answered that question, but I didn't. She was doing fine figuring it out on her own. That night at the party, she continued, when Sabrina made that comment about you whimpering, I had a choice. I could defend my husband of 8 years, or I could go for the cheap laugh, and I chose the laugh. She finally looked at me then, and I could see she was crying, though. The rain made it hard to distinguish tears from raindrops. I chose the laugh, Jack. I threw away 8 years of marriage for a 30-second joke that wasn't even funny. And the worst part is, I felt proud of myself afterward, like I'd won something. The rain was coming down harder now, drumming on the porch roof and creating a curtain of water around us. We sat there in our bubble of sound. Two people who used to share everything now sharing one last honest conversation. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that I'd been treating you like my emotional dumping ground for years. Clara said, every time I was frustrated or scared or feeling small, I'd take it out on you because I knew you'd absorb it without fighting back. I mistook your kindness for weakness, your stability for boring predictability. She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. I turned you into my punching bag and then I resented you for letting me hit you. How up is that? Pretty up. I agreed, speaking for the first time since she'd started talking. I know apologies don't erase scars, she said. I know I can't undo the damage I did, but I needed you to know that I understand what I lost. Not just the financial support or the household management or all the practical stuff you did that kept our lives running smoothly. I lost the only person who ever loved me enough to put up with my worst impulses. She stood up, the signed divorce papers still in her hand. I won't insult your intelligence by asking you to forgive me, she said. I just wanted you to know that the woman who smirked at you that night, who thought your pain was entertaining, that wasn't who I really am. Or maybe it was who I'd become, but it's not who I want to be anymore. She set the envelope on the small table between our chairs. You deserve better than what I gave you, Jack. You always did. I hope you find it. She walked back to her car through the rain, moving like someone who'd finally set down a burden they've been carrying for too long. I watched her drive away, the sound of her struggling engine fading into the distance until all I could hear was rain on the roof and water running in the gutters. That I sat there for a long time after she left, holding the divorce papers, thinking about closure and forgiveness and the strange relief that comes from finally hearing someone acknowledge the truth. Clara was right about one thing. Apologies don't erase scars, but sometimes they help you understand that the scars have already healed and you're stronger than you thought. The storm passed the way mountain storms do, leaving everything clean and new. I went back to splitting firewood and for the first time in over a year, I wasn't angry anymore. I was just free. The full scope of the fallout didn't become clear until Maya decided to spill the tea about 6 months after Clara's rain-soaked confession visit. Maya had always been the kind of friend who stayed connected to everyone's drama without getting personally invested in it. Sort of like a war correspondent for suburban disasters. She'd drive up to the cabin every few months with groceries, local gossip, and updates on the civilized world that I'd left behind. This particular visit, she came bearing news that was so satisfying I almost felt guilty about enjoying it. Almost. You're not going to believe what's happened to the Doyle family, she said, settling into her usual spot on the porch with a beer and the gleeful expression people get when they're about to share particularly juicy gossip. According to Maya's intelligence network, which was basically every hairdresser, grocery store clerk, and coffee shop employee in a 20-meter radius, my strategic disappearance had triggered a domino effect that was still toppling pieces a year and a half later. Clara had officially declared bankruptcy about 3 months after her cabin visit. Turns out when you're used to having someone else manage all the adult responsibilities in your life, learning to do it yourself while drowning in debt is a pretty steep learning curve. The mortgage went into foreclosure. The credit cards got maxed out and defaulted. And she'd even managed to get her car repossessed, which explained the beat-up Honda she'd driven up the mountain. But Clara's financial collapse was just the appetizer. The main course was what had happened to her parents' businesses. Mr. Doyle's construction company, the one he built over 20 years of early mornings and weekend work, was basically finished. Without my meticulous record-keeping, he'd lost track of project timelines, material orders, and client payments. The chaos had started small but snowballed quickly. "Remember the Henderson renovation?" Maya asked, referring to a big job that Mr. Doyle had been working on when I vanished. "Jack. He ordered the wrong windows 3 times because nobody could find the original specifications. By the time they figured it out, the Hendersons had hired a different contractor and sued for the deposit. It got worse. A commercial job at the new shopping center had fallen apart when Mr. Doyle couldn't provide the insurance documentation on time. Another client fired him when they discovered he'd double-ordered materials and tried to charge them for the mistake. Word travels fast in the construction business, and pretty soon, nobody wanted to hire a contractor who couldn't keep his paperwork straight. He's basically down to small handyman jobs now, Ma said, fixing leaky faucets and painting bedrooms. The man who used to have 6 guys working for him is now working alone out of his garage. Mrs. Doyle's boutique had suffered an even more spectacular collapse. Without my inventory management system, she'd managed to create a retail nightmare that would have been impressive if it weren't so completely avoidable. She ordered 50 summer dresses in January and no winter coats until March. Maya laughed. Then she forgot to track returns, so people were bringing back items she didn't even remember selling. The IRS got involved when she missed quarterly payments because she couldn't figure out how much tax she owed. The boutique had officially closed its doors about 8 months after I'd left. Mrs. Doyle had tried to sell the remaining inventory at a massive loss, but even that had backfired when she discovered half of it was damaged from poor storage. The final insult came when she found out she owed the shopping center 3 months of back rent because she'd been calculating the lease payments wrong. "She's working at Target now," Maya said, shaking her head. "Customer service. The woman who used to talk about her entrepreneurial spirit is asking people if they found everything they were looking for." But the real cherry on top of this disaster Sunday was what had happened to Sabrina, the architect of my public humiliation. After the party, when word had spread about how spectacularly the Doyle family's finances had imploded following my departure, Sabrina had quickly become the family scapegoat. Everyone remembered her drunk commentary about my potential whimpering, and they'd started connecting dots between her influence on Clara and the subsequent destruction of their little empire. "Nobody wants to be around her anymore," Maya explained. "She's like a walking reminder of how badly they screwed up. CL's cousins won't return her calls. The neighbors avoid her. Even her old friends have distanced themselves." Sabrina had bounced around for a while, crashing on couches and burning through the goodwill of anyone willing to help her. But her dramatic personality and tendency to treat other people's homes like her personal drama stage had worn thin quickly. One by one, her options had disappeared until she'd been forced to move back in with her parents. "She's 35 years old and sleeping in her childhood bedroom," Maya said with obvious delight. "Same room, same furniture, same live, laugh, love poster on the wall from when she was 16. Mr. and Mrs. Doyle barely talk to her. She's like the ghost of their family's former success. The family gatherings that used to be celebrations had turned into tense affairs where everyone blamed everyone else for their collective downfall." Maya had heard through the grapevine that last Thanksgiving had been a complete disaster with multiple arguments breaking out over who was responsible for driving Jack away. "Clara actually defended you," Maya said. "Can you believe that? She told everyone that they'd treated you terribly and that you'd had every right to leave. It caused a huge fight with her dad, who apparently said something about how you'd been too sensitive, and Clara lost it on him." The irony was beautiful in its completeness. The same people who'd found my humiliation so entertaining were now turning on each other as their world crumbled around them. The party that was supposed to be a fun family gathering had become the moment that marked the beginning of their collective downfall. "The best part," Maya continued, clearly saving the most delicious detail for last, "is that they keep talking about you like you're some kind of criminal mastermind who planned this whole thing. Like you somehow orchestrated their financial collapse from your secret mountain lair." She gestured around at the simple cabin, the chopped firewood, the basic setup that represented my new life. "They can't accept that they just took you for granted and didn't realize how much you were holding together behind the scenes. They'd rather believe you're some kind of vengeful genius than admit they treated their most reliable family member like garbage." I leaned back in my chair, watching the sun set behind the mountains, and tried to summon some sympathy for the people who'd made my life miserable for years. I came up empty. "You know what the funny thing is?" I said to Maya, "I didn't plan any of this. I just left. Everything that happened after that was entirely their own doing. That's what makes it so perfect. Maya replied. You gave them exactly what they said they wanted. A life without boring, reliable Jack. Turns out boring and reliable were the only things keeping their house of cards from collapsing. We sat there in comfortable silence, watching the day fade into evening. Somewhere down in the valley, the Doyle family was probably having another tense dinner, stepping carefully around the wreckage of their former lives, trying not to mention the elephant in the room that used to manage their finances and keep their world running smoothly. Up here in the mountains, I was grilling a simple dinner and planning tomorrow's hike. I'd never felt more content in my life. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well while your enemies destroy themselves. 2 years have passed since I walked through that side gate at the Doyle family barbecue. And I'm sitting here on my porch watching the morning mist rise off the mountains, thinking about how one moment of clarity can change everything. It's funny how the worst day of your old life can become the doorway to the best chapter of your new one. I bought Franklin's cabin when he decided to retire to Arizona. Too many winters up here for these old bones, he'd said. But I suspected he'd been planning this transition all along. Maybe he saw something in me that first day that told him I was going to be more than just a temporary renter. The paperwork was simple. Franklin wasn't the type of guy who believed in complicated legal maneuvers when a handshake and a fair price would do the job. Oh, now I'm a homeowner again. But this time it's different. This place belongs to me in ways that suburban house never did. Every improvement I make, every piece of firewood I split, every trail I clear, it's all mine, shaped by my choices and my labor. There's something deeply satisfying about owning something you've actually earned rather than something you're just making payments on. The freelance programming work evolved into something more substantial over time. Word gets around in the tech world when you're reliable and good at what you do. And apparently living in the mountains doesn't hurt your reputation when your clients are scattered across 3 time zones. Anyway, I've got a steady roster of companies that send me projects and the work is interesting enough to keep me engaged without being so demanding that it takes over my life. The best part is that I control my schedule completely. If I want to take a Wednesday off to hike to the lake, I do it. If I feel like working until midnight because I'm in the zone with a particularly challenging piece of code, there's nobody around to complain about the keyboard clicking or the extra coffee I'm making. It's amazing how much more productive you can be when you're not constantly managing someone else's emotional needs. But the real change in my life came about 8 months ago when I met Leah on the trail to Bear Creek Falls. I'd been hiking alone for over a year by then, perfectly content with my own company. When I came around a bend and nearly collided with this woman in park ranger gear who was examining something on the ground. Sorry, I said, stepping aside to give her room. Didn't mean to interrupt whatever scientific thing you're doing there. She looked up with this smile that was part amusement, part curiosity. Scientific thing? I'm trying to figure out if this is bear scat or just a really unfortunate pile of berries. That's definitely bear scat, I said, and she laughed. A real laugh. Not the polite social noise people make when they're being nice. Well, look at you, mountain man. Got yourself a degree in wildlife biology while I wasn't looking. Nope. Just common sense. In a year and a half of living up here, you learn to recognize the signs pretty quickly when your nearest neighbor is 5 miles away and doesn't carry pepper spray. That was the beginning of something I hadn't expected to find again. A connection with another person that felt natural instead of exhausting. Leo was stationed at the ranger office about 15 miles down the mountain, responsible for trail maintenance and wildlife monitoring across a territory that included my little corner of the wilderness. She started stopping by every few weeks, initially just to check on the cabin and make sure I wasn't doing anything that would get her in trouble with the Forest Service. But those official visits gradually turned into longer conversations, then shared meals, then overnight stays that felt comfortable rather than complicated. Leah thinks my quiet strength is attractive, not boring. She appreciates that I can fix things that break, that I know how to be alone without being lonely, that I don't need constant entertainment or validation to feel content. The qualities that Clara had found so insufferably dull are exactly what Leah values in a partner. You're like a Swiss Army knife, she told me one evening as we were cooking dinner together. Practical, reliable, always useful, but not in a boring way. This guy actually knows how to handle life way. It's amazing how different a relationship feels when the other person actually likes who you are instead of tolerating you while hoping you'll change into someone more exciting. Leah and I cook simple meals and take long hikes and read books by the fire. And none of it feels like settling or compromising. It feels like living that we don't live together. She's got her own place closer to town. And we both value our independence too much to rush into cohabitation. But she's here most weekends and I stay at her place sometimes when I need to be closer to civilization for work meetings or supply runs. It's a relationship built on choice rather than convenience, which makes it feel solid in ways my marriage never did. Sometimes, usually when I'm doing something completely ordinary like splitting wood or updating code or planning a hiking route, I remember that party. I can still see Clara's smirk, still hear the laughter that followed her cutting remark, still feel the heat in my face as I sat there absorbing their collective amusement at my expense. But instead of anger or humiliation, what I feel now is something close to gratitude. That moment of public humiliation gave me perfect clarity about exactly where I stood in my own marriage. It stripped away all the self-deception and wishful thinking and showed me the raw truth. I was married to someone who found my pain entertaining. Walking through that side gate was the beginning of everything good in my current life. If Clara hadn't shown me exactly who she was that night, I might have spent years more trying to save something that was already dead. I might never have discovered what it feels like to be genuinely appreciated rather than merely tolerated. The divorce was finalized months ago without any drama. Clara signed the papers. We split what little assets remained after her financial collapse. And that was it. 8 years of marriage reduced to a legal document and a forwarded mail address. I felt nothing when it was done. No sadness, no relief, just the mild satisfaction of completing a necessary task. I heard through Maya that Clara eventually got her life together, more or less. She's working as a bookkeeper for a small accounting firm, living in a modest apartment, and apparently doing well in therapy. I'm genuinely glad she found some stability, though I have no desire to be part of it. The Doyle family has largely faded into irrelevance as far as I'm concerned. They're still dealing with the consequences of their collective choices. Still probably wondering how their stable family structure collapsed so completely after one party. I don't think about them much anymore, except occasionally when Maya brings news that reminds me how much better my life is now than it was when I was trying to earn their approval. I've learned the difference between being useful and being valued. And I'll never confuse the two again. I've learned that some bridges are worth burning if they're leading to places you don't want to go. Most importantly, I've learned that the worst thing that can happen to you sometimes turns out to be the best thing that could have happened to you. These days, I wake up in a place I chose with work I enjoy next to a woman who thinks I'm exactly who she wants to be with. I make my own coffee, plan my own days, and go to bed when I'm tired instead of when someone else decides the evening is over. I never looked back through that gate, and I never will. The peace I found on the other side was worth every moment of humiliation it took to find it.